Hello, everybody. It's me again, and this is the first episode we're going to actually do where I'm actually going to react to a TV show as it's playing on another tablet. What I did, I've got two tablets for Black Friday. One will be used to play episodes, the other will be used to record the podcast. So, the first episode I'm going to be doing in this is one of my favorite TV series of all time. Bsbylon 5, the very first episode, Midnight on the Firing Line. So, here we go. Let me go ahead and press the start over button and wait for the proverbial thing to click over. I'll need to see how... Uh-oh. I accidentally closed it. I'm smart, am I not? I hit the wrong button. Come on. Wait, alright. There we go. Okay, that's what I get for being stupid. Alright. Trying to increase the volume so y'all can hear it. Okay. That might be a little too loud, so I'm going to turn it down. And of course we get the shot of the going to the Centauri station. And the thing about this show, obviously, you know, even back then when I was 22 years old, not even 22 at the time, where the graphics were really good, but the set design was admittedly cheap, but that was because they wanted you to focus on the actors. And while the designs were part of it, it was meant to be basically, hey, the station's, you know, cheap for a reason because it had to be designed that way. So Ragesh gets attacked with a Bsbylon 5. We see the big 5 Mile station. And Ivanova makes her first appearance. Yay!
Oh, right. You're new here. He only turns off his link for 10 minutes a day. And when he does, that's
now, for those of you who don't know, Sinclair left after the first season.
exactly.
And the reason he left was not known until a few years ago when Michael O'Hara unfortunately passed away. And it was because he had serious mental issues that were causing him to, I think it was paranoia, I think it's like, or something else like that, where he was fine up until pressure really got to him, and then he started having very difficult situations that were causing him to affect his performance and causing cast members to really not like him too much. So Londo's hair looks magnificent. I've always wanted to do cosplay for him, but I don't have the money. I'm afraid I don't have the natural hair anymore to pull it off, so yeah, I'm going to have to get a wig if I ever do that and learn how to do that. So. Garibaldi, one of the reasons I really hooked onto this show was the fact that he was a realistic character. You could put him in any other cop show and he'd be perfect for it. You know what's sad in this scene right here? The only person living is Peter Jurasic. Stephen First we lost a couple years ago, I think, and Garibaldi lost before that. Jerry Doyle unfortunately died of alcoholism. It's really sad how many male actors we've lost from this show already, compared that up until recently, the only one we had lost was DeForest Kelley and James Doohan on Star Trek. We, of course, lost Leonard Nimoy not too long ago, but the original 4 are still around. And from what I understand, Nichelle Nichols isn't doing so hot these days. George Takei is doing good. William Shatner is doing good. Walter Koenig, I'm not so sure about. The last time I saw him on video was doing an interview, and he didn't look so great. I don't know, maybe it's just he wasn't having a great day that day, I don't know, but kind of had me worried about him. And of course, here's the first year intro, which admittedly, the first season you really got to hang with it because the show doesn't really start getting its legs until later in the first season. Silence Importance was the show that really started bringing about the Shadow storyline. But this is just basically setting the stage of what the station was, who the characters were, the main players. Michael O'Hara, the first commander, Jeffrey Sinclair, Claudia Christian, yay, Susan Ivanova. Jerry Doyle as Michael Garibaldi. Mira Furlan as Delenn. Richard Biggs as Stephen Franklin, someone who we've also lost. Andrea Thompson as Talia Winters. Stephen Furst as Veer. Bill Mumy, the legend himself, as Lanier. Caitlin Brown as the Toth. I'll get to her in a little bit. Andreas Katsoulis, sadly we've lost him too. Peter Jurassic still around. Teaching at UNC Wilmington, by the way. On the other side of the state. That's interesting. And we get the scene here in the council chambers. And it's sort of their version of the UN. A bit of a very tight space where you have like 5 major powers plus the League of Non-Allied Worlds.
No answer. No one is talking.
Ambassador, I just heard.
Yes, you have my sincerest condolences for your losses.
You know nothing about this attack, Shakar?
I'm as astonished as you are.
The makeup work was amazing in this show. Andreas Katsoulis was able to project such a charisma with all that makeup on. And it's not just his tremendous acting ability that did that. They had a great ability to allow him to project with all that makeup on. That was a great, outstanding makeup they did for him. But it was laborious because Julie Caitlin Brown, who played Natoth, left the show after 1 season because of that. It's very, very arduous to play a Narn. And to the best of my knowledge, Andreas Katsoulis is the only one to play a Narn beyond 1 season. Although you did see Julie Caitlin Brown come back in the 5th season playing Natoth again. And here's Talia Winters. Interesting these two got together like this at the very beginning because, for those of you who know, their relationship warmed up considerably up until the time Talia Winters left. By the way, I should mention you might want to have some spoiler warnings for this.
No. And you'll excuse me, but I'm in the middle of 15 things. I'll let them know.
But, yeah, Talia
Thank you for coming by.
really wants to kind of warm up. She's a people person. Makes me kind of wonder what she would have been like if she had not been a telepath. She had brains, she had looks, she had charisma. So, and we get the first look at the Star Fury, really cool looking spacecraft. To me, the ideal spacecraft, and Maggie Egan, who I've met at a convention, very cool person. There's an election going on. And here's a very good line here, by the way. I'll just keep quiet for a minute.
Lieutenant Commander?
I don't see if there's any word yet from Earth Central in the Centauri problem.
No. Well, that worries me. They've had plenty of time to digest the reports, but so far, nothing.
Who do you think attacked the colony? The Narns, the Minbari?
Not the Minbari. It's not their way. They're too honorable to pull something like this.
I'm surprised to hear you describe the Minbari that way. After all, you fought them during the war.
Well, my father always told me the best way to understand someone is to fight him, make him angry. That's when you see the real person.
Was he also a pilot?
The best. The Sinclairs have been fighter pilots all the way back to the Battle of Britain. You tell me everything I know about flying and combat. He said to ignore the propaganda. Focus on what you see. I've never seen the Minbari fight dishonorably. They'd never pull a sneak attack.
Perhaps. Any word yet on the election?
It's going to be close. So, who are you voting for?
I think I'll vote for Marie Crane. I do not like Santiago. I've always felt that a leader should have a strong chin. He has no chin, and his vice president has several. This to me is not a good combination.
Well, I do abide by her thing about leaders having a strong chin. I'll leave you to decide that. Chloe comes off as a little wooden in this to begin with because they're trying to make her character very uber serious, but as time goes on, you get to see the real Claudia Christian come out in this. And here we go.
Great maker.
Activating mines. Notify Centauri Prime.
Who would do this? Why?
Under attack. Tell them it's the...
Reverse image. Hold. Enhance. That is a Narn heavy
Yep.
fighter.
Now we get to hear about the Narn Centauri
Master
conflict.
Shakar, he said he knew nothing of this. Shakar! Shakar! There she is.
And here's the Raider.
Speak to the phone. Life signs?
Negative. No survivors.
Check out the blast damage.
Roger.
Now the graphics here are dated by today's standards, but back when this show came out, they were revolutionary because up until that time, if you wanted to do a sci-fi show, you had to use physical models, which were expensive. This was done on an Amiga computer, I think called a toaster, and I used to use that in radio and TV technology class at Isothermal Community College, and that was astonishing. Now here we have the first big face-off between Jakar and Londo. I'll stay silent for a moment.
Crash, is it? Bastard. You won't get away with this. We'll strike back, and we'll strike back hard.
I assume you're referring to the attack on Ragesh 3 by our forces. Just found out about it myself. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation.
What reasonable explanation is there for the slaughter of unarmed civilians?
Curious, we wondered the same thing when you invaded our world. The wheel turns, does it not, Ambassador?
We should have wiped out your kind when we had the chance.
What happened? Run out of small children to butcher?
You're paid.
Let him go! If he wants to die, let him. Listen to me, Ambassador. Your time has come and gone. It's our turn now. One night you'll wake up and find our teeth at your throat. Sleep well, Ambassador. Sleep lightly.
Well, isn't that interesting? You have the supposed descendants of the Centauri Republic, the ascendants of the Narn regime, but as we would see later on, things don't necessarily come out as you think they would in the very first episode.
I apologize for the incident with
Now,
Shakar, Commander.
here's the interesting scenario of Londo Mollari. He's sort of the victim right here.
Not repeated.
Jakar is the villain right now. But and this is a spoiler alert, as the 5 years go on, you see each other kind of change roles, where
We have a way, you see.
Londo's the bad guy and Jakar's the good guy, and you know when that X is crossed, and if you know about theater terms, when that X is crossed to where the fates are changed, and one fate is changed, the other fate is changed, and the Centauri look very French. They're more like very flamboyantly French, Italian, Spanish, from a certain time, back when they were really powerful countries and trying to impact the world. So you see that in their architecture, such very flamboyant, but at the same time they're kind of hiding the secret that they're kind of in decay. And as you watch the series as it goes on, you'll see that there are those people who want to reverse that decay, and there's a huge price to reversing that decay.
20 years from now,
So,
one of
yeah.
us will be wiser and older. One of us will be dead, used to say. Me, I need another drink.
This whole dream scenario
We have a chance to put together
that Londo has about someone killing him 20 years down the road
Have to be stopped
does actually come true.
while we're still
And if you know the story, you know how ironic it is. I'll go ahead and spoil it for you. Spoiler alert again. Jakar is the one that kills Londo. But it's because Londo wants him to, because Londo is being controlled by something called a Drox
told him it was a waste of
keeper. And Londo wants to be free of this keeper. In order to do so, he has to die. So, in a very strange scenario, his once worst enemy performs an act of a true friend in killing Londo, freeing him of that Drak influence. Drak, of course, being the race that entered the shadows, what came after the shadows.
I don't know if he is alive or dead.
I'm sorry.
This is a scene.
I know this is hard for you, but if this escalates into war, you'll give the Narns exactly what they want, a chance to divide us so they can move in. There are other ways. Babylon.
Sinclair looks kind of weak here. You know, it's a situation where I think that this tells Babylon 5 isn't as strong right now and this eventually Sinclair starts growing as the season goes on, but this leads to Sheridan, who's a more stronger character. That wasn't the original plan. Sinclair was the one that was actually going to go through the 5 years. So, to me, Sinclair is more of a diplomat than he is a soldier. He can fight when necessary. He's got that soldier discipline in him. But the truth is that if you want to fight a battle, you want Sinclair to be kind of dealing with in the background, and Sheridan at the front of the story. And here, of course, is Ivanova and Jerry Doyle. Jerry Doyle eating like I am. I should say Garibaldi eating like I do.
Starving man.
Seeing death was a way of doing that to me. There were 15 bodies on that ship we found. I mean, what's going on around here? We got a war breaking out on Raga Street, pirates at work over here. You ask me, the universe is going to hell in a handbasket.
And that's part of the reason why I like Garibaldi. He has that cynicism. It feels real. It feels very real. And you got Talia coming around to take a look at Ivanova, kind of spying on her a little bit, maybe. You would think that it would be because Talia senses that Ivanova is a latent telepath, but in reality, Talia's got a bit of a crush, I think. And now you see the former married couple, Jerry Doyle and Andrea Thompson. They actually got married, I think, I don't know if it's first season or second season. Unfortunately, they split up, I think, a couple of years later, and they have a kid together. I met Jerry Doyle back when he was alive, about a decade ago. He's a really cool guy. And I did tell him to his face, the reason I watched the show, kept staying with the show, is because of your character. He was happy with that. Now here we have Kosh, the Vorlon, the very mysterious character who wants to appear godlike. But yeah, as the series goes on, you know they are not exactly as godly as you think they are. Very interesting effect here. Now, the interesting thing about this scene right here is basically you can tell it's somebody flashing a light behind a curtain or a screen. And you're thinking, what the hell's going on here? Now watch, as you see there, the flash of light, the Kosh's suit lights up. You're wondering what the hell's going on. Well, we know Kosh is a non-corporeal being of energy, sort of like the prophets on Deep Space Nine. Interesting that the way he says that is, are the Vorlons sort of resignedly going, do they not want to have this happen, or are they like, and here's on Bsbylon.
Is there a reason for this, or to save time, should I just go ahead and snap your hands off at the wrist?
That goes to tell you she's more than just a very straight, serious person.
So I'm backtracking to find out which company sold the routes to those.
Their chemistry together is another reason why I stayed with the show, because they felt real. They felt like you could put these two in a modern-day situation, and they would interact in the same situation. And here's one of my favorite scenes right here, this show.
You can go to hell too. I wouldn't want you to feel left out.
I've used that line before, a few times.
Londo. Londo, why are you doing this?
Because we are a race of lunatics and cowards. I finally received word from our glorious leaders. Do you know what that convention of genetic defectives have decided to do about the attack on Ragesh 3?
Convention of Genetic Defectives. I love that line. I've used that more than often. And I'm not talking about the Centaurum either. Back when I worked at Walmart, it was about Bentonville. Or maybe, perhaps, store management. Not all of them, just some of them.
Why? Because Ragesh 3 is too far, too small, too unimportant to risk a confrontation.
If you'll excuse me, I need a little bit more of Sam's Cola. Ironic enough, I got it from Walmart.
Besides, by the time our ships got there, everyone would be dead anyways.
Drunk Londo is fun Londo. But also destructive Londo. In more ways than just smashing bottles.
No, listen to me. You will not repeat a word of this. We have heard nothing. Is that clear?
But he's also a
We can get
schemer.
others to step in. Perhaps we can embarrass those idiots back home into doing something. You understand?
And you know this is being noticed by certain people, what he does
You
here.
understand? Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Londo's going behind his government's back to basically do what really he should do. Okay. Here we go.
Blue 14.
Talia and Garibaldi standing in an elevator.
Well, may I ask you a question? I've tried twice to talk to Lieutenant Commander Ivanova, and I don't know if it's me or her, but I can't get through. I can't imagine what it is I've done to upset her.
Well, unlike me, Lieutenant Commander takes a while to warm up to people. Especially
Garibaldi trying to put the moves onto
when she gets off duty at
Talia?
$1,800, she always stops by the casino to wind down. That might be a good time.
Not exactly being subtle about it.
I'll try. Thanks. Afterward, if you like, you can stop by my quarters and I can show you my favorite thing in the whole universe. Okay, my second favorite thing in the universe.
Now watch the smile. I wonder sometimes if they may have, if she'd stayed on the show, had a situation where she might have fallen for Garibaldi and not Ivanova.
I see we have similar habits. Before going into battle, I also need to walk in the green for a moment.
Interesting character study here in Jakar. Back then, he was a warrior, all-out warrior, but he was a spiritual person at the same time.
Centauri.
As time goes on, the spiritual side takes over, but the warrior is always there. You know that.
Is that it? I will confess that I look forward to the day when we have cleansed the universe of the Centauri and carved their bones into little throats for Narn children.
This is where he later realizes the mistake.
Careful, Ambassador.
His
Now,
thirst
the green
for
light lately ends well.
vengeance. And
In
I'm
our position, you would
sucking on some ice, by the way.
Our two worlds, our two species, are more alike than you might think.
That's true right there.
I would remind you that we were one of the few who would supply you with the weapons.
And this is interesting that Sinclair turns him down. If it were another Earth Force soldier, maybe more in tune with his government, maybe he does.
Narns will sell to anyone who can afford the credits. That'll give you points on one thing, Ambassador. We are alike in one respect. We've had plenty of experience with sneak attacks. Pearl Harbor, the terrorist nuking of San Diego, the destruction of our first Mars colony. It's a long and bloody history. Do you know what we learned from it? That the sneak attack is the first resort of a coward. Just a minute. You didn't even have the decency to pick a military target before the Civilian colony. What a challenge that must have been to the great Narn military. What's wrong, Ambassador? Don't have the guts for a fair fight? Another place I would have you skinned alive for saying that. You want me? You know where to find me. See you in council.
Not exactly a very subtle diplomatic moment there by the two gentlemen there. This makes you think that Jakar is the real big baddie here, but the truth of the matter is he's desperate.
Commander,
He knows his regime is kind
how
of
the raiders operate. The shipping companies buy
maybe
access
going
to the
beyond what they're
and
capable
sell
of, maybe stretching too far,
the routes for all the
and
supply
he's
shipping.
worried about that, but he has to project this sense of strength,
Blew out last month, flatline.
when in reality he doesn't
Sounds like
have
someone
that.
cracked their data bank.
Exactly. Only one ship booked before the data crash hasn't been attacked yet. My guess is they'll hit it in 6 hours.
Somebody hacking into a computer system. That sounds familiar.
But here's the tough part. The ship's
That's the great thing about Babylon 5. You
It's kinda
can
got booked by a refugee
you can
escort.
really tie some of the things into what happens these days.
The raiders get there before we do. They're dead.
Now this show debuted in 1994. That was 25 years ago.
Over this, Commander. You've exceeded your authority.
If we don't stop Bernard aggression,
And here's the situation, Ray. I'll explain in just a moment.
to get the council to authorize military intervention.
Asking you again to delay the vote. And I'd like to be able to see you when I talk to you. Commander, damn it, don't you realize that we've got an election in less than 24 hours?
Senator, colonists are dying out there.
That's nothing. We just came out of one war, Commander. What are you trying to do, start another? The Earth Alliance can't go around being the galaxy's policeman. They want to fight it out, let them. Just keep us out, but at least till after the election. If you can't postpone the meeting, then I am authorized by the subcommittee to tell you to abstain. Earth has to take a neutral position.
But that will damage the Centauri case. If we pull out, others might do the same.
Not our problem. Those are your instructions. This discussion is concluded.
Note the words, not our problem.
Just an update on that other matter, Commander.
Earth Force,
Standing by, ready to intercept.
or excuse me, Earth Dome, which is the capital city for Earth Alliance.
They're packing some pretty big guns.
And here's the moment he realizes it.
Commander,
That might be it. Tell Garibaldi to stand down. I'm taking his place with Delta Flight.
should I postpone the council meeting?
No. Look, if I'm at that meeting, I'll have to do something I don't want to do. So let it go on without me. You can take my place on the council. Don't worry. It's all on the agenda. Just take the vote and see what everyone wants to do.
Any other instructions, Commander?
Lots of them. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find you before I left, so you never heard about any orders from Earth Central. The last thing you heard...
Very scheming. This is a show about schemes, both good and bad, and in many cases right in the middle, where the lines are gray. Gray is a very interesting color in this show. You'll see a lot of it, both in literal terms and in figurative terms. And there's the Star Furies, one of the most awesome crafts ever to fight in space. It can only fight in space, it cannot fight in an atmosphere. But in Season 3, I believe, we are introduced to the Thunderbolts, which can fight in an atmosphere. They're basically they look like a Star Wars X-Wing. But they pack a lot of firepower, too. And here we go through the jump gate to go after some pirates to see if they got Narn. And here, of course, is the Council,
Babylon 5 Council,
which
League of Non-Aligned Worlds.
right here is just a bunch of guys in masks that can't really speak, but in time you'll see them actually develop characteristics.
Our options include the imposition of planetary blockade, ambassador to
And here's Jakar
The council that before
doing what he does best, grandstanding.
invaded our sector and began the 100-year reign of terror, Ragesh III was a non-colony. Now that we are free of the invaders, it is our right to reclaim it.
We recognize the prior claim, but the reality is that Ragesh III has been Centauri property for over a century. To start a war over blood spilled so long ago, where does it end? You kill them and take their land. They kill you and take the land back. On and on and on. The cycle of hatred.
Justice.
Now note that line she said there. It could appeal to could be representative of a lot of conflicts on Earth. Israel, Palestine, India, Pakistan,
Scanning on all frequencies.
over and over again. You know,
The last transfer point for the refugees.
is land really worth blood? In some cases, yes. In a lot of cases, no. That's the thing about history. There are no easy answers. There are no easy answers in Babylon 5.
Locking on. Magnifying. Confirm
Now this space battle right here doesn't look that great now, and back then it really didn't look all that great either. They were still trying to kind of figure out what kind of weapon systems they were going to have. They didn't want to have the phasers and photon torpedoes.
Your attention to the monitors. We're about to receive a live broadcast from Ragesh 3. I believe it
Interesting scheme here, which is the hostage video, which we're all familiar with if you lived in the 1980s.
Researcher and project director for the Ragesh 3 agricultural.
And also reminds me of when Al-Qaeda would capture Westerners in Afghanistan and Pakistan and hold them hostage. They would produce these videos, and then, of course, they would subsequently execute their prisoners in very grisly ways, which is meant to, of course, stir up hatred.
No reply. Faced with chaos and anarchy, the
And this is
Ragesh
where
Administrative Council
Londo's scheme comes down around him.
from the neighboring Narn regime.
It's not true.
We have chosen our own free will to ally ourselves with the Narn government.
And this is where Jakar plays him.
We will, of course, maintain social and economic.
Watch very carefully, or I should say listen very carefully to this scene. Londo knows Jakar is lying, but Jakar also knows Londo is lying. And this is where Jakar has him. This is a chess game. Watch carefully. Or listen carefully.
Don't you understand? Can't you see what they're trying to do? They forced him to read that statement. I'm sure they threatened to kill him. It's a lie.
If you want to talk about lies, Ambassador, what about your lie of omission? Is it not true that your own world has voted against taking any actions in response to the liberation of Ragesh 3?
Yes, but
Then why have you asked this council to take actions that even your own government considers inappropriate?
Checkmate.
This council should not be used to carry out your own personal agenda. I move that this council now vote to dismiss all charges against the North regime. Is there a second?
And here we go. Jakar has him.
This is Commander Jeffrey Sinclair of Babylon 5 to raiding parties. Surrender your vessels or be destroyed. Repeat, surrender your vessels or be destroyed. So I can take that as a no.
Now, look at this battle right here. Now, I like the fact that the Starfury can turn around on its axis. It's a real space battle which utilizes the fact there's no gravity.
Delta leader, raiders are breaking off. Will we pursue and continue attack?
But the graphics here are kind of dated. It was TV back in the early 90s.
6+8, assume escort position and
So they didn't have a lot of money for this, but they made do as best they could. At the time, it was revolutionary. Now it looks dated, but
activate long-range scanners.
if you didn't have this happen, Battlestar Galactica doesn't get off the ground, the new one, as well as other graphics-heavy shows. I'll get to that in a moment.
Picking up transmissions.
And here's where the thing turns against Jakar right here. And now Londo Mollari, pissed off that Jakar screwed him over, decides that he can't wait 20 years and he's going to have his little moment with Jakar right now, taking bits and pieces of a gun he's put together, hidden very, very subtly. You know, yeah, this is what really makes it amazing about this show. The kind of subtleties they do with this is that he's got a gun in plain sight, pieces of a gun in plain sight, and you don't know they're there. Now that looked a little too obvious, but it was hidden. Sometimes if you can hide something in plain sight, you can make it look less obvious that you're not actually hiding something because you're.
calls out for blood.
Yep. Like Star Trek before, there's a lot of human influence here. Now watch this subtle bump. Boom. Talia bumps into Londo. Talia reads Londo's mind ever so briefly. Now, does Londo realize that Talia understands what he's going through?
If you'll excuse me.
I think he probably does. She's stunned for a moment. She panics a little bit and then realizes who she's got to call. And yep, that's who she calls. And guess who meets him on the way, Londo on the way to go off at Jakar?
Londo, Mr. Garibaldi, I have to talk to you. You'll excuse me another time. What's wrong with that?
I'll let the scene play out.
Mr. Garibaldi, get out of my way. No, I can't do that. Go back to your quarters, Londo. No, don't force me to make this official. No! I don't want to do it. But you lay one finger on a weapon and I'll kill you where you stand. You don't understand. Yes, I do. I understand better than you'll ever know. I know it burns, Londo. I know the things it makes you want to do, but this isn't the way. Not now and not here.
He's my blood, my nephew.
But if you kill Jakar, none of those colonists will get out alive. You have to know that.
Well, it seems I'm still on target for my appointment 20 years from now.
What appointment?
It's a long story. Perhaps another time.
Now, in this scene, there was only one moment of physical confrontation.
Check your quarters for weapons. Make sure I don't find
In other television episodes, they would have probably had a longer, protracted
Garibaldi,
episode of action.
you really have killed me?
Yes. Yes, I would have. But I'm just as glad I didn't have to. The paperwork's a pain in the butt.
That's Garibaldi right there. Now, it's interesting that other shows might have had a little bit more of a physical confrontation here. It was ever so brief, but you got a sense of the characters right there. Garibaldi doing what has to be done to preserve the peace.
I'm afraid there is, Ambassador. And I'm afraid it's you.
We managed to drive the raiders out of this sector, at least for now, but look what I found on the command and control ship.
Shame, Dolphin, push!
I kept wondering where the raiders were getting their heavy weapons.
Now here's this in this scene. Yeah, they find out that the Narns were supplying the Raiders. It's a little TV-esque, a little gotcha at the end of the show. And Joe Straczynski, the creator of Babylon 5, tended to try and stay away from stuff like this, but occasionally it crops up. But it's interesting to hear that the Narns seem to be the really bad guys.
That's not all. When the ship docked and we went
There
inside,
are reasons for it. There's a lot of gray area here.
they contain reports the captain here monitored between Ragesh 3 and Narn Central.
They confirm everything Ambassador Malari said about the attack on the Centauri colony, that it was unprovoked, and that the invitation was made at the point of a gun. Now, it seems to me that you have two choices. Tell your forces on Ragesh 3 to withdraw, or we bring this evidence to the Council. Chief?
And of course, here's the moment of gotcha with Jakar.
Your choice, Ambassador.
The interesting part is that the denouement between Jakar and Londo, which just comes later on in the season, which there's a big change
Well, not to mention Earth Central.
later on in the year.
We did it without sanctions, and the polls haven't even closed.
The polls. I almost forgot to vote. Better get going. Then it's a quiet evening at my place, and my second favorite thing in the universe, assuming I can find someone to share it with.
Garibaldi, I don't even want to know.
Okay.
With 5% of the returns in from the American, Russian, and Chinese.
Interesting thing here is that the Santiago is played by, God, I can't think of his name. Douglas Netter, who is a big wig on the show, one of the main key producers. And here's the scene between Talia and Ivanova, where Ivanova tells her story about her mom. And this is why Talia learns that Ivanova is not very fond of Psychor.
Thank you for your help this afternoon.
And here's an interesting part. Maybe there's a little bit of chemistry there. It's interesting that this is the early 90s, and they're teasing a lesbian storyline, not really right here, but down the road you kind of get that sense that they're going to go there. And in the second season finale, spoiler alert, it's one of the last episodes of the second season, spoiler alert, they were going to have Talia and Ivanova kiss. They spent the night together, but you would imagine the implication was they kind of just spent the night together as friends. But if they kissed, there would have been more than that. But there was sort of that it's sort of like with Xena, in that, did Xena and Gabrielle ever hook up? Well, did Talia and Ivanova hook up before Talia is discovered to have a sleeper agent inside her head? And when we get to that episode, I'm going to tell you a theory of mine that I don't necessarily think Talia met the fate she allegedly met.
Or agree to take certain drugs for the rest of your life. Drugs that inhibit your telepathic abilities. That's the law. Unregistered telepaths have to be controlled in order to protect the privacy of others. Have you ever seen the results?
And this is where Talia is confronted for the first time that Psy-Corps propaganda isn't perfect.
She didn't want to join the Corps. Didn't want to go to prison. So they gave her the treatment. For 10 years, a man in a gray suit came to the door once a week. And he gave her the injections. They were strong. Terribly strong. Every day we just watched her drift further and further away from us. The light in her eyes just went out bit by bit. And when we thought she could go no further, she took her own life. Sorry. What happened back then is not your fault. But it's part of what you are. And yet you're as much of a victim as my mother. I don't feel like a victim. No. And so far I cannot tell if that is good or bad. Perhaps tomorrow we can start out on better terms. I very much doubt it.
Now, there is that thing I think Talia really wants to kind of crack the shell of Ivanova. What her implications are they the fact she's attracted to her? And of course here's Garibaldi with Duck Dodgers. The reason they have this in here is that, oh, by the way, guess what? Delenn shows up. As part of Delenn's looking at Earth culture. She's kind of wondering what the hell popcorn is, but you know. It's amazing to me how the subtle little scenes like this say a lot about the show. It's incredible the way they do things like this. It really is. But hell, you know, it's little subtle cues right here.
We are declaring incumbent President Luis Santiago the victor over challenger Marie Crane. Santiago's campaign was based on a promise to
And here's Sinclair in his his apartment or crew quarters, whatever you want to call it. All right, now we'll stop it here, and let me find out how I can stop it. Okay, come on, let me stop this. Skip. All right, skip, and let me break out of this. Exit playback. There we go. All right. I'm using this tablet for the first time, so Yeah, that was the first episode of Babylon 5. We may do soon another one, the second one, which is Soul Hunter, which is a really much better episode. Midnight on the Firing Line was an introduction to the universe of Babylon 5, especially for those who didn't see the pilot the year before The Gathering. There were some major changes, major uniform changes, major changes in the look of certain aliens and such. It's interesting to see the major difference between Star Trek and Babylon 5 right off the bat. Star Trek, you've got good guys being good guys, bad guys being bad guys. In the original. Klingons are the baddies, the Romulans are the baddies, the Federation's the good guys. Babylon 5, not so much. Yeah, the Narns look bad right now, but you can sort of understand their point of view because they've been attacked and enslaved by the Centauri centuries ago, hundreds of years ago. The Centauri are getting, victims now of their own issues. They're getting now as what they once gave. The Minbari, we'll find out more about them later on, but the Minbari and the Earth had a war 10 years before this episode. I won't give a whole much about that because we'll talk about that a little bit later on, maybe the next episode we do. But here's an interesting thing about the show itself. It's an arc-driven show. For those of you who may not know what that term means, it means the storylines continue all through the show. Some end, new ones begin. Up until that time, the vast majority of television shows, in fact, pretty much all American drama shows, were episode-driven, which is basically that the characters, in a sense, really never change. It's just that there may be some things, somebody gets killed off, they keep that going. But the characters really don't change a lot. If you watch Star Trek The Next Generation, which came on before this, you'll see this in effect because Riker deals with a lot of stuff. But yet he's the same person, essentially, as he was to begin of the show. You can't say that about Babylon 5. And I'm going to make a bold statement right here, which I think there's a lot of truth to it. Had Babylon 5 not come along, you would not see the arc-driven shows that later came down the line a decade later, like Battlestar Galactica, the new one, like Game of Thrones, yeah, I'm throwing that out there, and a lot of other shows that came out. Not necessarily sci-fi shows. House of Cards, another one, the U.S. version of it. Very arc-driven. This comes mainly from the British, because British television had a history of arc-driven shows and arc-driven literature. Big sci-fi sagas, where in the United States we didn't really have that as much. It was basically one episode, one novel here, one novel there. But in the 90s, things began to change, and you started having more series, more novels that carried over stories and such. So this is an interesting thing in the 1990s that took place, and that is the beginning of arc-driven television, where you had this huge saga that up until that point you didn't have because television producers didn't think that audiences would pay attention long enough to that. So in that Babylon 5, his graphics look dated by today's standards, and the acting may not have been as great as you would like to have seen it. First of all, they were dealing with a very limited budget. Some of the acting was actually really good. Peter Jurasik, Lando Malari, who played Lando Malari, Andres Katsoulis, who played Jakar, Mira Fallon, who played Delenn, were outstanding, had great moments. The actors had really good moments as well, but you can say at times that Bruce Boxleitner playing Sheridan was a bit wooden at times. Same with Claudia Christian playing Ivanova. Same with Jerry Doyle, who wasn't actually a classically trained actor, played Garibaldi, and a few others. It was a situation of the circumstances of the show that they're trying to do so much in a 6-day shooting schedule. Mind you, a 6-day shooting schedule. They were shooting this stuff in 6 days. I think maybe 7 at the beginning, but later on they moved it to 6 to to basically cut costs. And they only had a 12-hour shooting day, which in Hollywood, 14, 16, 18-hour shooting days are not unheard of. This show was meant to be done very economically. And this show got done. If they were still wanting to do something at 7 o'clock in the evening, John Copeland, the, I guess, day-by-day producer, said, nope, got to save it for tomorrow. They made sure it didn't go over 12 hours. There's a reason for that. Money. They wanted to prove you could do a sci-fi television show on a budget. And they did it. And that's why you had Battlestar Galactica on Sci-Fi a decade later. That's why you had other sci-fi shows come along. Farscape, Firefly, even though it only lasted one season and probably could have been done cheaper had Joss Whedon gone to a cable network instead of Fox. But that's beside the point. And I think a lot of Firefly was, in my opinion, up against it right from the very beginning because Fox didn't know what they were doing. I will get to that when I do Firefly. But Babylon 5 to me is the best television show ever because despite all the limitations, despite the fact it didn't have a huge budget, despite the fact that some of the acting at times was a bit wooden and such, the overall story was incredible. It was unprecedented at the detail and level. I don't think we've seen a show, not even Game of Thrones was this detailed in the beginning, the middle, and the end. Now, you could say Game of Thrones, the beginning and the middle was very detailed, but the end, they were kind of, George Martin had not finished the series yet. So they were kind of playing along with what they thought he was going to do at the end of the series. And I think in many ways that did not pan out so well for the series. Same with Battlestar Galactica. Everything was great up until somewhere through the third season. And then things started to fall apart a little bit. So there is definitely that. But anyhow, excuse me, I ate something earlier, now it's coming back to haunt me. Because that got burps. Anyhow, I don't know when we'll do the next one. This was just a test run to see what I wanted to do with this. I'm not sure exactly how I want to do this. I don't know, because I didn't have any notes to take about this. I just did it. I put it on there, just did it freestyle. But to me, if you're looking for a television show that is the origin of modern television in the last 20 years or so, with a lot of arc-driven stories and such, because what Babylon 5 said was this convention that fans will not follow a show from episode to episode. They showed that was wrong, and that the presumption of Hollywood to say, well, audiences will get annoyed if they have to miss a show and can't follow it, because at the time you had VCRs where you could tape these shows, so if you missed it, you could tape it. So, yeah, the arguments against episodic television were mounting. The arguments for it were eroding because you had VCRs come along, and then a decade later you had TiVo come along, DVRs, and now you have streaming services, which you can watch a whole show in a weekend if you so desire. And that has made television dramatically different than it was 40 years ago when I was a kid, where you had only 3 networks, and if you missed a show, unless you were one of those that had a very expensive VCR, you're going to miss it. So there is that. So, yeah. I want to thank you for tuning in to listen to this. We'll hopefully do more of these. What my plan is I want to do not just Babylon 5, but series I've not really had a chance to watch much of, like The Expanse, the Man in the High Castle, other shows, not just sci-fi shows, but shows I'm really interested in. So next year, what I'm planning on doing is with this podcast is doing something like this, where I'll take maybe a season and do it, and then do a rundown of that whole season, and then move on to another show. And that's sort of what I want to do with this, because to me, this is what I really enjoy about all of this. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. But I want to thank you for tuning in. A lot of stuff is coming up next year. Once I get my own place again, and because I don't like doing podcasts here with my families around because they will interrupt. But next year when I get my own place again, I am going to have a lot of things I'm going to plan on doing. I may do far more podcasts you probably want to listen to, but there is definitely that. Plus we'll have more guests in as well. So yeah, I want you to stay tuned, because a lot is coming up for the podcast in 2020. We may also do some video podcasting on YouTube. Simulcasting, I should say, because we'll also do it here. But yeah, it's a lot coming up in 2020. A lot of exciting things coming up in 2020. And we'll document that as we go along. Plus it's an election year, an Olympic year, and all that. And that is it for now. As we like to say here, we want to wish you a good day, good luck, and may the good news be yours.